What if I told you that love triangles are rarely what they seem, and that sometimes the real danger doesn't come from the love itself, but from the lies? Atlanta, Georgia. A city alive with culture, a hub for Black excellence, and a community rich with talent, history, and ambition. Among the many success stories in Atlanta was Dr. Marcus Richardson, a man who had seemingly achieved it all. A respected physician with a thriving practice, a beautiful wife, and 2 young children who adored him, Marcus was the embodiment of success. Or so it seemed. To the outside world, his life was the American dream brought to life, the kind of family you'd see smiling from a holiday card or featured in a local magazine. But behind his polished exterior and picture-perfect family life was a web of lies and betrayal. Marcus was living a double life, juggling not only the demands of his career, but also a dangerous affair that had already begun to spiral out of control. As we'll see, it only takes one spark to set a whole life ablaze. Atlanta was about to discover just how far ambition, jealousy, and obsession could push people, and how thin the line between love and hate can really be. The rise of Dr. Marcus Richardson. Marcus Richardson's story was inspiring, at least at first. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood on Atlanta's South Side, Marcus was no stranger to struggle. His parents, Gloria and James Richardson, worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Gloria was a dedicated schoolteacher, often grading papers late into the night, and James held down 2 jobs as a mechanic during the day and a night security guard. They instilled in Marcus the values of hard work, resilience, and ambition, reminding him constantly that he would need to work twice as hard to get half as far in a world stacked against Black men. But, more than anything, they dreamed of seeing their son rise above the systemic challenges that had held them back. Gloria often said, "You're going to change this family's story, Marcus." And he did. From an early age, Marcus showed a natural talent for learning, excelling in math and science, and earning straight A's throughout high school. His teachers praised him as bright and determined, a young man destined for great things. That potential was realized when Marcus earned a full-ride scholarship to Morehouse College, one of the most prestigious historically Black colleges in the country. For his parents, it was a moment of immense pride, proof that their sacrifices had not been in vain. After completing his undergraduate studies with honors, Marcus went on to medical school, eventually specializing in cardiology. His journey wasn't easy. There were long nights spent studying, clinical rotations that tested his endurance, and moments of doubt about whether he was truly cut out for the field. But Marcus persevered, graduating near the top of his class. He not only became a doctor, he became a symbol of success for his family and the broader Atlanta community. By the time he was in his early 40s, Marcus had built a thriving medical practice in downtown Atlanta, catering to a loyal patient base. He had a sprawling home in the suburbs, drove luxury cars, and wore tailored suits that complemented his sharp, professional demeanor. He was respected by colleagues, loved by patients, and admired by his peers for his tireless work ethic. Marcus seemed to have it all: a successful career, financial stability, and a beautiful wife, Shanice, who had stood by his side since his medical school days. Together, they had 2 children who were the light of their lives. From the outside, Marcus appeared to be a man in complete control of his destiny, the epitome of a self-made success story. But behind closed doors, the story was very different. Marcus had spent so long crafting a perfect image that few knew the pressures and cracks beneath the surface. The demands of his career often left him drained and distant at home. His marriage to Shanice, once a partnership full of love and understanding, had grown strained under the weight of his long hours and emotional unavailability. And then there was the secret he was keeping, one that would shatter everything he had built. Marcus wasn't just juggling the stress of his career and family life. He was also carrying the burden of a dangerous affair, and as we'll see, his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The perfect wife and a crumbling marriage. At the heart of Marcus's seemingly perfect life was Shanice Richardson, his wife of 16 years. Shanice was no stranger to ambition or hard work herself. A driven and accomplished woman, she earned a degree in business administration and had quickly climbed the corporate ladder, landing a role as an operations manager for a Fortune 500 company. For years, Shanice was the epitome of balance, seamlessly managing her career while supporting Marcus through the grueling years of medical school and residency. But when their children came along, Shanice made the difficult decision to step away from her career to focus on raising their family. She believed it was a sacrifice worth making, for her children and for Marcus, who had his own demanding professional life. On paper, their marriage seemed ideal, the kind of life many people could only dream of. Their relationship appeared to be a partnership built on mutual respect, love, and shared dreams. Together, they lived in a sprawling suburban home, complete with perfectly landscaped gardens and a backyard pool. They drove matching luxury cars, threw elegant dinner parties for their social circle, and vacationed in Europe and the Caribbean, posting enviable photos of white sandy beaches and five-star resorts on social media. Friends often referred to Marcus and Shanice as the power couple, a shining example of Black excellence in their community. But behind the carefully curated image, cracks were beginning to form. As the years went by, Marcus and Shanice's relationship started to show signs of strain. Marcus's demanding schedule as a cardiologist meant he was rarely home for dinner, and he often missed important family moments, school recitals, birthdays, even anniversaries. Shanice, ever the supportive partner, tried to understand. She knew Marcus's career required sacrifices, but over time, the loneliness began to weigh heavily on her. She often found herself eating alone at the kitchen island or scrolling through social media late at night, envying couples who seemed to have all the time in the world for each other. Marcus, on the other hand, wasn't oblivious to Shanice's feelings. He knew she felt neglected, that their once fiery connection had cooled into something distant and routine. But instead of addressing the growing rift, he chose to avoid it. Confrontation wasn't Marcus's strong suit. He preferred order and control, and the messy emotions of his home life were too much for him to face. So, he did what he knew best. He threw himself even deeper into his work. Long hours at the office became a convenient escape, a way to avoid the uncomfortable truths lurking at home. But that decision, that avoidance, would ultimately lead him into dangerous and uncharted territory. It started innocently enough. Extra hours at the hospital, after-house calls with patients, late-night meetings. But over time, Marcus's focus shifted. His escape from home turned into something far more destructive, something that went beyond work. In his search for validation, for excitement, or maybe just for a distraction, Marcus began to seek attention elsewhere. And that's where things took a dark turn. What began as flirtation soon escalated into a full-blown affair, one that would set his seemingly perfect life on a collision course with disaster. Shanice had no idea what was coming, and neither did Marcus. But the choices he made in those moments of weakness would have devastating consequences, for him, for Shanice, and for everyone else caught in the web of his deception. The arrival of Tamika Harris. Tamika Harris entered Marcus's life like a whirlwind. A 36-year-old nurse with nearly a decade of experience under her belt, Tamika had a charisma that was impossible to ignore. She carried herself with a confidence that drew people in and a boldness that commanded attention. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, whether she was advocating for a patient or cracking a joke to lighten the mood during a tense moment at the clinic. Her energy was magnetic, and she had a way of making everyone around her feel seen and appreciated. But what really caught Marcus's attention wasn't just her personality, it was her understanding of his world. Tamika wasn't just another nurse. She was someone who deeply understood the pressures of the medical field. She knew what it was like to juggle long hours, high-stakes decisions, and the emotional toll of caring for patients day in and day out. For Marcus, who often felt isolated by the demands of his career, Tamika was a breath of fresh air. She didn't just sympathize with his challenges, she empathized with them. She got it in a way few others did. And that shared understanding planted the seeds of a connection Marcus hadn't felt in years. At first, their relationship was entirely professional. Tamika was one of the clinic's most reliable and hard-working nurses, and Marcus often relied on her to manage complicated cases or handle difficult patients. They spent long hours together reviewing charts, discussing treatment plans, and brainstorming ways to improve the clinic's workflow. But over time, those professional conversations began to bleed into personal ones. Tamika would ask about Marcus's family, and he'd confide in her about the struggles of balancing his career with his roles as a husband and father. He'd tell her about Shanice, about how their marriage had grown distant and how he felt more like a provider than a partner. Tamika, in turn, opened up about her own life. She talked about the toxic relationships she'd endured, the men who had taken her kindness for granted, and her growing fear that she'd never find someone who truly saw her worth. Their shared confidences created a bond neither of them expected. What started as innocent conversations turned into subtle flirtations. Tamika's compliments about Marcus's professionalism took on a personal edge, and Marcus found himself drawn to the way her smile lingered a second too long. There were lingering glances across the clinic, a playful touch on the arm during a conversation, and inside jokes that only the two of them shared. It was all unspoken, but the chemistry between them was undeniable. And then came the night that everything changed. It was after a late shift at the clinic, the kind of night where exhaustion made their defenses feel weaker. The clinic was quiet, the rest of the staff having left hours earlier. Marcus and Tamika were reviewing a patient's file, but the conversation quickly veered off course. They started talking about their lives again, the pressures, the loneliness, the dreams they'd let slip away. And in that moment, something shifted. The weight of unspoken feelings hung heavy in the air, and before either of them could stop themselves, they leaned in. What started as a kiss quickly escalated into a full-blown affair, one that would soon spiral out of control. For Marcus, the affair was intoxicating. Tamika made him feel seen, desired, and understood in ways he hadn't felt in years. For Tamika, Marcus represented something she thought she'd never have: stability, intelligence, and someone who valued her beyond the surface. But while their secret romance gave them both something they were missing, it was also dangerous. The boundaries they crossed that night set them on a path neither could turn back from. Marcus's perfect life was beginning to crack, and the fallout was going to be devastating. Angela Martinez, the second mistress. If Tamika was fired, Angela Martinez was ice. Where Tamika was bold, outspoken, and radiated confidence, Angela was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and deeply introspective. At just 29 years old, Angela was still relatively new to nursing, and she carried herself with a quiet humility that made her stand out in a different way. She was the type of person who blended into the background, doing her job with quiet precision and grace. While Tamika turned heads the moment she entered a room, Angela's strength lay in her ability to listen and empathize, earning the trust of her patients with her calm demeanor and warm smile. Angela looked up to Marcus in a way that was almost reverential. She admired his dedication to his work, his ability to connect with patients, and the way he seemed to effortlessly make even the most complex medical concepts seem simple. To Angela, Marcus was more than just a doctor. He was a mentor and a source of inspiration. He represented the kind of success and stability she hoped to achieve one day. Angela often stayed late at the clinic, seeking advice from Marcus about her career. She asked him questions about patient care, how to handle difficult situations, and even sought his guidance about advancing her education. Marcus, always eager to nurture talent, took her under his wing. Unlike his relationship with Tamika, Marcus's connection with Angela started in a very different way. With Tamika, there was heat, chemistry, and an instant spark that neither of them could ignore. But with Angela, Marcus played the role of a mentor, protector, and guide. He praised her for her hard work, encouraged her when she doubted herself, and reassured her that she had what it took to succeed in her career. For Angela, Marcus wasn't just her boss. He became a man who made her feel valued and appreciated in ways she hadn't experienced before. While Tamika challenged Marcus, Angela made him feel needed and important, and that was a feeling Marcus found hard to resist. Their relationship took a fateful turn one evening when Marcus invited Angela to dinner under the guise of celebrating her one-year anniversary at the clinic. It was supposed to be a professional milestone, an opportunity to acknowledge her growth and contributions to the team. Angela was thrilled, thinking this was a reflection of her hard work being recognized. But the dinner quickly veered into something more intimate. They didn't go to a busy restaurant filled with co-workers, as she had expected. Instead, Marcus chose a quiet, candlelit bistro far from the clinic, a place where they wouldn't be recognized. Over the course of the evening, the conversation grew increasingly personal. Marcus asked Angela about her life, her family, her dreams, and even her fears. She opened up in ways she hadn't before, sharing stories of how she had struggled to find her footing in the medical field and how she had always felt like she wasn't good enough. Marcus, in turn, told her she was extraordinary, that she was better than she gave herself credit for, and that she had so much potential. The way he looked at her, the sincerity in his voice, it was intoxicating. For Angela, it wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something deeper. By the end of the night, the professional line they had maintained was irreparably blurred. What started as a dinner meant to celebrate her career ended with them sharing a kiss outside the restaurant, one that lingered too long to be a mistake. From there, things escalated quickly. That single moment unleashed a torrent of emotions that neither of them could contain. For Angela, it felt like a fairy tale. A powerful, successful man who saw her, believed in her, and, in her mind, cared for her in a way no one else ever had. For Marcus, it was something he couldn't quite name. Comfort? Validation? An escape from the pressures of his life? That night set in motion a series of decisions that would forever change both their lives. While Angela may have thought their relationship was something special, something uniquely theirs, she had no idea that Marcus was already juggling another secret affair. What started as admiration and mentorship had now turned into deception and betrayal, and the consequences would be devastating for everyone involved. The juggling act. Managing one affair is a dangerous game, but two, that's playing with fire. Marcus had become a master of deception, carefully balancing the tangled web he'd created. He kept Tamika and Angela in separate lanes, meticulously controlling when and where he saw each of them. His ability to compartmentalize his life was nothing short of calculated genius, though, as we'll see, it wouldn't last. Tamika, being older, more confident and experienced, had her suspicions. She noticed subtle changes in Marcus, like the way he occasionally avoided answering certain questions, or how he sometimes seemed distracted when they were together. Deep down, she suspected Marcus might not be entirely faithful to her, but she couldn't confirm it. Tamika chose to ignore the red flags, hoping they were just her imagination. Angela, on the other hand, was too smitten to even question him. To her, Marcus was perfect, a successful, attentive man who made her feel seen and valued. Her naivety blinded her to the possibility that Marcus's heart and time might already be divided. She thought she was special, the only one who held a piece of his attention outside of his family, completely unaware of the chaos brewing beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Marcus's wife Shanice had begun noticing changes in her husband as well. He was more distant, more secretive, and his once sporadic late nights at the clinic had become a regular occurrence. Marcus always had an excuse ready, an emergency at work, an important case, or an urgent staff meeting, and Shanice, accustomed to his demanding schedule, chose to believe him. She chalked up his behavior to work stress. After all, being a cardiologist was no easy job, but the truth was far darker than she could have imagined. Unbeknownst to Shanice, her husband wasn't just living a double life. He was juggling a triple one, and the walls of his deception were starting to close in. The breaking point. Things came to a head in the most unexpected way when Tamika found out about Angela. It wasn't something she actively went looking for, it was pure chance. She overheard a conversation between two nurses at the clinic during a break in the staff lounge. One of them casually mentioned seeing Marcus and Angela leaving together late one night, laughing and looking a little too close for comfort. At first, Tamika thought she had misheard, but as the nurses continued chatting, the pieces began to fall into place. Her heart sank, and then, almost instantly, fury took over. Tamika wasn't the kind of woman to let something like this slide. That evening, she cornered Marcus after work, her voice shaking with anger. "So, who's Angela?" she demanded, arms crossed, her eyes burning into his. True to form, Marcus tried to charm his way out of the situation. He denied it at first, claiming the nurses must have been mistaken, then pivoted to downplaying his relationship with Angela. "She's just a colleague," he insisted. "You know how people like to talk." But Tamika wasn't easily fooled, and Marcus's excuses only made her angrier. She pressed him harder, refusing to let him wriggle out of this one. Eventually, when he realized there was no way out, Marcus promised her he would end things with Angela, but of course he didn't. Marcus had grown too comfortable living in his web of lies, and breaking things off with Angela would mean dismantling one part of the life he had carefully constructed. Instead, he doubled down, continuing to see both women while hoping neither would discover the full truth. Angela, on the other hand, was still completely oblivious to Tamika's existence. She thought she was the only one in Marcus's life outside of his wife, believing their connection was something unique and special. In her mind, she was the one Marcus turned to when he needed comfort and support. She saw herself as his safe space, never suspecting that she was part of a much larger, much messier situation. Her naivety shielded her from the truth, but it wouldn't protect her for long. The storm brewing around Marcus's lies was only growing stronger, and soon it would erupt in ways none of them could have anticipated. Shanice's discovery. Shanice had always trusted her instincts, and lately they had been screaming at her that something was very wrong. Marcus wasn't the same man she had married. He had become more distant, more secretive, and increasingly guarded with his phone. He no longer left it lying around the house, always keeping it in his pocket or face down on the kitchen counter. When she asked him about his long hours at work, he snapped at her or brushed her off with vague answers. Shanice tried to convince herself that it was just work stress. After all, being a cardiologist came with its share of pressures. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. Her instincts told her that Marcus was hiding something, and it wasn't just work. One even confronted Marcus in the sanctuary of their home, where their children could overhear. She wanted proof, and more importantly, she wanted to catch him red-handed. If Marcus thought he could get away with betraying her, he was about to learn otherwise. The trust they had spent 16 years building was gone, and Shanice wasn't going to sit quietly while her world fell apart. You seem to be enjoying the video. Wouldn't you like to subscribe to the channel to enjoy many more just like it? Why don't you do so as the story reaches its ending? The night of the crime. That fateful night, Shanice drove to Marcus's clinic, her mind racing and her heart pounding in her chest. She'd followed him earlier, watching as he left the house with his usual excuses about catching up on paperwork. But this time, Shanice wasn't going to let his lies go unchecked. She parked her car across the street, her trembling hands gripping the steering wheel as she waited in the shadows. When she saw the clinic's lights still on and no other cars in sight, at least none she recognized, she decided it was time. She was done being the quiet, trusting wife. She needed answers, and she was ready to confront him, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to walk into. When she entered Marcus's office, her breath caught in her throat, and her entire world shattered. There, in the dim light of the clinic, was Marcus, locked in an intimate embrace with not one, but both Tamika and Angela. The three of them were entwined in a way that left no room for doubt. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a living nightmare. Worse than anything Shanice had ever imagined. Her chest tightened as anger, humiliation, and heartbreak surged through her veins. What happened next was a blur of shouting, accusations, and raw, unfiltered emotion. Shanice unleashed years of pent-up anger, her voice shaking the walls as she screamed at Marcus, calling him a liar, a cheater, a man who had torn their family apart. Tamika turned on Angela, her own fury boiling over as she accused her of ruining everything. "I knew you were too innocent to be true," she spat. Angela, meanwhile, stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't know about her. I didn't know about either of you," she cried, her voice trembling with fear and confusion. Marcus, caught in the eye of the storm, tried in vain to calm everyone down. "Stop! Just stop!" he shouted, his voice desperate and panicked. But the damage was done. The room was a cacophony of rage, betrayal, and shattered illusions, and there was no turning back. Then everything spiraled out of control. In a fit of rage, Tamika grabbed a scalpel from the counter. Her hands trembled as she turned on Angela, screaming, "You stole him from me!" Before anyone could stop her, she lunged at Angela, slashing wildly. Shanice, overcome with grief and betrayal, turned on Marcus, clawing at his chest, screaming, "How could you do this to me? To our family?" The scene descended into chaos. Shouts, screams, the sounds of scuffling, and the sharp, metallic smell of blood filling the room. By the time the police arrived, the office was a scene of absolute carnage. Angela lay motionless on the floor, her white nurse's uniform stained red. Marcus, too, was lifeless, slumped against the desk with his eyes wide open, as if frozen in shock. Tanika and Shanice were both covered in blood, their faces streaked with tears and their hands shaking as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. The officers on the scene were horrified. What had started as a confrontation had turned into a deadly explosion of rage and betrayal. Tamika was immediately taken into custody, her face a mixture of defiance and despair. Shanice, too, was arrested, though she seemed almost catatonic, her eyes distant as if replaying the events over and over in her mind. The once thriving clinic was now a crime scene, and the lives of everyone involved were forever changed. What should have been a confrontation to expose the truth had instead ended in tragedy, a tangled web of lies and infidelity that had finally snapped, leaving devastation in its wake. The fallout. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational and widely discussed in Atlanta's history. Every major news outlet covered the case, turning the courtroom into a media circus. Tamika's defense team argued that her actions were fueled by a moment of blind rage, a crime of passion rather than premeditation. Her lawyers painted a picture of a woman who had been betrayed, manipulated, and pushed to her breaking point. Ultimately, the jury convicted her of manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Shanice's trial, on the other hand, took on a different tone. The prosecution painted her as a woman who had allowed her heartbreak and betrayal to escalate into violence. They argued that while her pain was understandable, it did not excuse the choices she had made that fateful night. Her defense tried to frame her actions as the result of emotional distress, but the jury was less sympathetic. Shanice was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years behind bars. The community was left reeling, mourning not just the loss of lives, but the shattering of trust in a man they had once admired. Marcus Richardson had been a symbol of success and integrity, someone people looked up to as an example of what could be achieved through hard work and determination. Now, his name was synonymous with scandal and tragedy, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal, heartbreak, and violence. Final thoughts. This tragic story is a chilling reminder of how lies, betrayal, and unchecked emotions can unravel lives and destroy even the strongest of bonds. It forces us to reflect on the fragility of trust and the lengths people will go when they feel cornered by heartbreak, jealousy, and rage. Beyond the courtroom drama and shocking headlines, this tale is a cautionary reminder of what can happen when we let deceit and unresolved emotions fester unchecked. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Was there a moment, perhaps several, where someone could have stepped in, where a different choice could have been made? Or was this a collision of circumstances destined to spiral out of control? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe this was a tragedy born of impulsive decisions, or the inevitable result of Marcus's web of lies? And don't forget, secrets, no matter how carefully they're hidden, always come to light. The truth has a way of surfacing when we least expect it, and the consequences can be devastating. If you found this story as gripping as I did, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the dark and tangled world of true crime. I've got more stories coming your way, stories of betrayal, deceit, and consequences you won't believe. And if you're ready for another jaw-dropping case, click on this video right here. You won't believe what happens next. Stay safe, stay alert, and always remember, the truth always finds a way.